This is the School Success Podcast, a podcast for school leaders to learn from other school leaders what's working and what's not, and to get inspiration and encouragement, as well as strategies to grow school enrollment, connect with families, retain teachers, recruit teachers, and everything in between. You guys are heroes, and I cannot thank you enough for pouring into this next generation that's coming behind us. My goal is you will take at least one thing away from every episode that you can take back to your school to make it better than it is right now. Please enjoy the School Success Podcast. Hey, school success makers. Today we're joined by my new friend Granville Jones out of the great state of Texas. He's in the process of starting a brand new Christian school over there. And of course, he's up against some challenges and some things are also going good as well. So when I was talking with him, I was like, man, I got to have this guy on the podcast because I know there's people out there that can learn from Granville on what he's going through currently. Because maybe you're in the process of starting a school or have thought about maybe starting a school one day. So I'm hoping you will get a ton of value from this episode just like I did myself. So please enjoy this next episode of the School Success Podcast. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the School Success Podcast. I'm your host, Mitchell Slater, and joined by a new friend out of the great city and state of Austin, Texas, Granville Jones, who is the head of school at this new school that's going to be opening actually in the fall of 2023, Fruit of the Spirit Academy. He's got an amazing story. He's got a great background in education. And you might be like, wait, this guy, he doesn't even have the school open yet. And he's on this podcast talking about education. Yes, because he is going through a lot of stuff right now to get ready to launch this school. And I know this will speak to some people who are listening who maybe have thought about starting a school or maybe in the process right now of starting a school. And obviously with his background in education, he was a perfect candidate to be a guest because he has a ton of knowledge in that. But hey, I will get off my high horse here. I'll let him introduce himself. So Mr. Granville, welcome to the podcast, sir.
Thank you, School Success Podcast, and thank you, Mitchell. It's my pleasure being here today.
It's going to be awesome, man. And I always start off the podcast with, hey, you're from, obviously talking about where people are from. So you're from Austin, Texas. If I was to ever come visit you in Austin, Texas, what are we going to do that day that's going to be so fun that you're like, you have to do this when you come to Austin? It's like, you have to.
Austin is a glorious city. It is a nature lover's paradise. So I'd say if you ever come to visit Austin, there's a couple of things you need to do. One is to visit Lady Bird Park. Lady Bird Park is where you can rent like paddle boards and boats and things of this nature. And it's just a glorious time. The weather here in Austin is unparalleled. In the summer, typically it's 100 degrees or so. However, it's more of a drier heat, not as dry as Arizona or New Mexico, but coming from, I'm a native of Richmond, Virginia, where it's very muggy and humid. It's a different type of heat here. So when you look at the 3 digits, initially your heart skips a beat, but then you realize, hey, actually, it doesn't feel that bad out here. It feels like maybe 10 degrees less, comparatively speaking, from Richmond, Virginia or the East Coast. But yeah, you have to go visit Lady Bird Park. It's just beautiful. It's the Colorado River that narrows a little bit coming through Austin, and it's just beautiful and a lot of great fun there. Also, Austin is known as the outdoor music capital of the world. I don't know how factual that is, but I've been told that numerically even that is proven that we have more outdoor concerts and venues and events here than any other place in the world. But it's a great place for music of pretty much any genre. So I'd say you have to visit Lady Bird Park. You have to explore and experience our outdoor music scene. And then also, Texas is known for its barbecue.
Yeah.
So you have to partake of some of the historic barbecue places in Austin, Texas. So I'll say those are the 3 things.
I love me some brisket. So
Yes.
that's one
Yes.
thing I definitely would want to
Yes.
try. And I've heard just restaurants in general in Austin. I guess Austin's like a really big foodie city. Is that
It
true?
is. Yes, that's exactly true. Which the great balance to that is the fact that it's so outdoorsy as well. So you can fill up on all these calories and then you go work it out.
Perfect. There's no guilt anymore with the food that we ate. And
Right.
it's interesting you make the point about it being dry with the 100 degrees because obviously I live in South Florida, very humid, very, very wet. But I've always said to like my wife and I, like, it doesn't, when we have, like, it's been, as we're recording this, typically in the 90s, we've been having it every day. And it is. It's very, very hot, but it's still not as bad as other states I've been to in the summer, like Virginia, for instance, because I had a friend
Mhm,
there and I asked him, he used to live in South Florida, and I said,
mhm.
"Hey, um, I got to ask you, since you've lived in both places, whose summer is hotter?" And he said, "Virginia, hands down, is hotter," because he
Right,
goes, "We don't have a breeze. Like it's
right.
just hot. And we have a breeze because we're about 5 miles or so from the crow flies to the beach. So there's just always a breeze, and it's not, again, it's hot. I don't want to be outside like doing a roof or something, all day
Yeah.
long, but like it's not super bad. So I feel you when you say dry heat. I feel like that's bearable and I could get by in Texas.
Yes, yes, sir.
Well, I know you and I chatted before we obviously started recording this podcast, and I loved to hear your vision and what kind of what God put on your heart for this school that you're wanting to open here next year. I'd love to just kind of like I guess before we dive into the school, let's talk about your background first of kind of how you got to where you are today, but kind of your background in education, and then we'll kind of dive into the Fruit of the Spirit Academy.
Yes, sir. So it's interesting. I did not remember this until about several years ago. My next door neighbor growing up was almost like a second father for me. We were really close, and he was an elementary school principal. And so after church on Sundays, often he would take me. They didn't have any children at the time. So he would often take me on a ride to his elementary school. He'd go work on his principal duties at his principal's desk. And then I would kind of go between his office and the hallway and just, have a good time. And I honestly did not remember this until a few years ago, but I feel like the Holy Spirit brought it back to my remembrance. Sometimes in life, Mitchell, there are things that happen like earmarks, like things that like set your destiny, set your course. I remember I was 4 or 5 years old and I left my neighbor's office, stepped into the hallway, and like a traditional old elementary school, it had a long corridor, a long hallway, and only the emergency lights were on because it was just the principal, of course, there. And I remember looking down this really long hallway. And I'm not a spooky Christian, so I didn't hear an audible voice or anything like that. But I remember a couple of years ago that feeling of me being in the hallway when I was 4 or 5 years old. And I just felt like something inside of me like said, this is your calling.
Hmm.
When you grow up, you're going to have an impact in a place like this. And so here we are, and that actually came to fruition. So I became a public school teacher, coach, mentor back in the early 2000s. I became a school administrator, rose to assistant principal, made a great difference in the lives of many. But Mitchell, I couldn't get my breakthrough to become a principal in the public school. I didn't understand why, because I really was a solid school administrator, so much so that a lot of the early young assistant principals in my school district came to me for like mentoring. And so I was mentoring younger, more inexperienced assistant principals and, sowing wisdom into them and encouragement. And then after a year or two, I saw several of them moving on to get their principalship. And so as you're going through things in life, sometimes things don't make sense. It's like, what is going on? It makes sense now, but in full disclosure, in the mid 2010s, when I was going through seeing myself getting passed over a lot, I didn't understand what was going on. Now I understand. So in between today and time of me saying, what is happening? God moved me out of public education. And so I transitioned to private Christian school education. And when I got there, Mitchell, I just felt like, oh, now it makes sense. Because being a Christian in a public school educational setting is a little bit of a tension there because there are certain guidelines we have to follow, we have to abide by between the separation of church and state. We have to kind of be careful not to, what we can say and so forth. And so, as a public school administrator, I would treat everyone the way I felt like Christ would treat someone. But I couldn't be preachy. I had to be careful what I say and how I delivered it. But as I became a private Christian school administrator, I was free and clear. And so I could become the Granville Jones that really was there. So the Lord just began to use me, and I had the greatest privilege of leading over 40 kids to Christ doing Wednesday chapel messages. And I don't care what I do from this point as an educator, more important than test scores and all of that, and even behavior changes, leading kids to Christ is my greatest accomplishment. And so from that, let's fast forward to December of 2020. Again, I'm not a spooky Christian, so I don't hear God's voice audibly. But, being a devout Christian, he says you should know my voice, right? So I feel like when God speaks, either through people or circumstances or his word, I think I have a discernment to like hear and understand that he's speaking. So December of 2020, I was in my office and I felt like I heard that inner voice say, son, now you're ready to be a head of school at a Christian school. This is why I did not allow you to become a principal in the public school. So as such, I began to document the beginning of a strategic plan for a private Christian school called Fruit of the Spirit Academy, FOSA for short. And 10 pages came, and it came like this, Mitchell. It was like a divine connection. And then after 10 pages, communication ceased. And at that time, I was like, okay, that's kind of weird. It was coming so steadily, and then it just stopped.
Hmm.
And so at that point, I just put the vision of FOSA on the shelf. Okay. I started applying to become a head of school, and one school in Austin, Texas jumped all over me in a good way, and then hired me to be their head of school. Um, Without getting into too much detail about that situation, I will say that interesting dynamic in that school is that the board had to become a micromanaging board before I got there. So that board basically was running the school on a daily, day-to-day operations basis for the most part for 2.5 years before I arrived. In my interview process, I expressed to them that I would need them to empower me to be a head of school and no longer micromanage. I was given assurances that would happen, but as I arrived in Austin, I realized shortly that that was not happening. So, we tried to navigate through it successfully. And to make a long story short, in March of 2022, I had a meeting with the chairperson, and it became obvious that a visionary, strong leader and a micromanaging board is not a good mix. And so we mutually agreed it'd be best that I resign at that time. So I resigned, having just moved here to Austin, Texas, 9 months before. My wife and my daughter relocated with me 1,200 miles from my hometown of Richmond, Virginia. Here we are in March of 2022, 1,200 miles away from home. And it's like, Lord, I know you didn't bring us out here to Austin, Texas to forsake us. What is going on? What do you want me to do? I know you sent us here for a purpose, for a reason. Let me know what's happening. After a couple of weeks, I felt like I heard that inner voice again say, son, go back to the shelf and pull the vision of FOSA off the shelf. Let's really dig in now. So I pulled it off the shelf and I began to just pray and meditate. And that strategic plan that originally was 10 pages is now 35 pages. It's like just a download of what the school should look like on a daily, day-to-day, long-term, mid-term, mid-range. I just feel like it's an all-encompassing vision of a strong Christian school here in Austin, Texas. The interesting dynamic for me is having had the privilege of being a public school administrator and a private school administrator. I've seen the pros and cons of both settings. What I've seen in the public school arena is a really strong instructional strategy, using data in a positive way to meet kids where they are and to remediate them where it's needed to help grow them academically. I've seen a lot of good in that as a public administrator. On the flip side, on the moral and character development side of public education, I've seen a great deficiency. Now let's flip that to my private Christian school experience. What I've seen in the private Christian school experience is a complete flip-flop of that. I've seen in those settings, the schools I've been a part of, good moral and spiritual development, but lagging on the academic side, really lagging with instructional strategies and techniques, lagging with how to use data appropriately to remediate students that are needed. And Mitchell, the students that are really high flyers, like stretching them, driving them to a higher level academically, which sometimes in education can be more of a challenge stretching those high flyers than it is even remediating those who need additional support and help. So FOSA, Fruit of the Spirit Academy, what I plan on doing through the help of the Lord is to elevate that school, start from day one, being strong both spiritually and academically. I don't think it has to be an either or. I don't think it has to be a diametrically opposed situation, that we're going to unite and marry those two successful models. So just excited about what the Lord's going to do through Fruit of the Spirit Academy in Austin, Texas.
Man, and I'm excited for you. I really am, Granville. You got a lot going on, and a lot in this next, as we record this in the summer of 2022, a year and a half, a year, I guess maybe almost a year away. You think about it, it's like, obviously enrollment will be starting for the fall.
Yes.
And with that comes challenges. And so I'd love to ask the guests all about, some of the challenges they're up against. And obviously you have some very unique ones, but I'd love to just for you to share some of the ones that you are currently up against, and how are you trying to or currently combating those challenges?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mitchell. So it's two major challenges that are paramount for us right now. One is finding here in Austin, it's a glorious town, but because it's the third fastest growing country in America, and reason being, it's pretty much the Silicon Valley of the Southwest. And a lot of Californians are moving here because the technology field here is so rich. As such, though, the competition for housing and for commercial real estate is extremely competitive. And so as such, I've been a little surprised at how difficult it is for us to find a location. I was hopeful that we would already have a location designated, but we are still talking to different potential locations, and bargaining and trying to see where we land. So as it is right now, we aren't sure what part of town we're going to be located in. My heart is I want FOSA to be extremely diverse culturally, ethnically, and social economically. And as such, because of gentrification, Austin, a lot of the African American community has fled the city of Austin because real estate taxes have gone astronomically high. And so building and finding a way to bring diversity into FOSA is a challenge. So we really have a heart for the east side of Austin, which is traditionally the most underserved area of Austin. It's the haves and the have-nots. Typically, the east side of Interstate 35 is more the have-nots. That's changing with the gentrification some, but traditionally that's how Austin has been designed. So we really would prefer to start, whether it be northeast, directly east, or southeast. But starting out, we are going to be happy with whatever the Lord provides for us. But it has been more of a challenge than we originally anticipated, finding a location to begin FOSA out of. So that's number one challenge. The second challenge I would say is donors. Being that we do want to make a quality Christian education affordable for all families, we do have a sliding scale tuition model. Mitchell, I remember growing up in Richmond, Virginia, and I was a good student. And I remember driving by a glorious Christian school in Richmond, Virginia. And as I rode by, it looked like a mini Duke University. And I rode past it and I was like, oh my goodness, let me go home and talk to my parents about what do we need to do to get me to go to that school. And I remember going home, I'm from a lower middle class, and I went home and I shared with my parents, hey, how about me checking into getting into that school, getting admitted into that school. And I remember them saying some words that stuck with me for years. And the words were, son, we know that you'll be able to go there and handle yourself well, but we simply don't have the money to send you to that school. So growing up, for me, private Christian education, or just private school education in general, was for the haves. It was for the wealthy only. Okay. And that is true for a lot of schools, private schools that rose up in the 60s and 70s in particular, really was a way to resegregate. So my heart is make sure that FOSA is a school that goes against resegregation, that we allow an opportunity for any family to have an affordable, quality Christian education by a sliding scale tuition model. Now, having said that, Mitchell, the challenge is that we have to be fueled financially through a lot of donors, people who our mission and vision with them, and they have the means and the ability to help support students, sponsor students, and help, fund our vision. So, we're in the midst now of reaching out to potential donors and prospects, building those relationships, explaining the why behind how their money is going into good ground. It's not wasteful, but FOSA is going to make eternal changes in the lives of many, not just our students, but the families that are attached to those students as well. Because we want to make sure that we provide a quality education on all levels. We want our students to be developed holistically. And what I mean by that is that they're strong academically, they are strong socially, they're strong emotionally, that they're culturally aware and diverse. But in order to do that, we do need a vast majority of donor money. So I would say location and donors are the paramount two challenges that we are facing as we prepare to open the doors of FOSA.
I appreciate you sharing those. And as you were sharing, I'm like, all right, there's some challenges I think that popped in my head, and I would love to know if there are challenges that you're up against. So I'm thinking about whole country, maybe in the world, but specifically our country is dealing with teacher retention, teacher recruitment. And as you're preparing to launch this school in the fall of next year, how does that go when you're trying to get these teachers on board? If we're going, hey, like we're launching the school, but it's not going to be till next year. What do you think? I don't have any tuition coming in, so like the pay, we got to talk about that. Like all these conversations have got to be really, really difficult. And also, if you're talking to this teacher, you don't know what next year's, I guess, specifically going to look like. Is it going to be a K-12 right away? Is it just going to be a couple grades just at the beginning? And like, how? So is that also a challenge, like this, where your school is going to be grades, who you're going to serve right away, and then also these teachers you're talking to?
Yeah, great question. Our intention is to start K-5, start slow, dream big, right? And so we want to start K-5 next year. And if it winds up that our enrollment for the older age groups is a little less, then what we can do is combine the older classroom to differentiate across a couple of grade levels. But we do want to start, our intention is to start K-5 next summer. So teaching is a calling, Mitchell. And so what we are selling for the potential staff members that we're interviewing now is that, yes, we're not talking about this school year, we're talking about next school year. We hope to start signing contracts for our employees for the 2023 school year starting in probably January. But right now I'm interviewing and vetting potential candidates, and we are selling the vision and mission of FOSA and the why. Because if you are coming to teaching and education just for the paycheck or just for the summer breaks, then you probably won't last, because it's a ministry, and education is so draining because you give everything that God has placed in you in the terms of time, in the terms of emotional investment. So all of that you sow into your kids, and it leaves you spent. So if you aren't called to be a part of FOSA, then it's not going to work. So what we're doing is trying to vet out those who feel a calling to our ministry versus someone who just wants to teach, right? Now, having said that, on the practical side, we can't offer peanuts, okay? So what we are trying to do, and we believe in God for, is our donor base that catches on to our vision and mission, that we do have enough money in our operating fund to have competitive pay, okay? So we do want to have competitive pay. Public school can afford to pay more because they have public dollars associated with it. But I don't want them to take a major price discount coming to FOSA. They should not be asked to do such a thing. So we do want to have competitive pay. We do want to have some benefits for our staff and their families. So it's a fine balance there between the practical and the spiritual. But the ones that I've interviewed so far, most of them are like, you know what, Mr. Jones, we really feel a calling to FOSA, and we're so energized by the vision and the mission that we're willing to wait a year. Let me know when you're ready to start hiring, and let's revisit this conversation. So far, we are attracting a quality set of individuals that say they want to be connected to FOSA. And we just believe in God and trust in Him that He's going to bring those who are called to be a part of FOSA.
I heard an interesting statistic probably yesterday, it's probably over the weekend that I read it. And again, people can make up whatever they want, put it online, but I did find it really interesting. It said that teachers are willing to take a 15% pay cut if there is a school with a clear vision of who they're serving and what they're about. Like they want to be a part, people want to be a part of something and not just be like, I go to work, I go home. And like you said, it's a calling, teachers that feel called just like you did when you were a child. Like, oh man, this is something I'm going to do one day. And so you take that and you go put them into a regular school that's just like, hey, we just teach you, do your stuff and go home type of thing, versus a school, and that could be any school, it could be private Christian or a charter or anything, saying, this is what we're about and this is what you're buying into. And like people are willing to, that's crazy enough. And I do believe that is like take a pay cut to be a part of a family, to be a part of a vision that they're like, I get to be a part of this. And
Yes.
I see that with you and your school. You're going to have that. You're having this vision you're casting on these teachers you're interviewing. And they're like, man, I want to be a part of that. I want to help. I want to get this started and be a part of the beginning of Fruit of the Spirit and all that stuff. So
Yes, sir.
that's super exciting. So I wanted to encourage you with that. And
Yes.
I think it's the perfect segue into the second section where I love to talk about what's going good. And you're like, all right, well, we're not open yet, Mitchell, but there are still things that are going good that we want to share and what's going on. So if you were to share some of those that are just like you're really proud of, that you want to kind of brag on God, brag on whatever, however you want to do it, about what's going on, what would those be?
It's several, but one I want to really spend some time talking about is the board that God is assembling for us. We have a fantastic board of 7 quality members that are goal oriented, that are fired up, encouraged. What I have found from working with several boards and organizations is when you have a strong leader, that's a huge positive. But you also have to have a board that the relationship between the board and that leader there's a synergy there. There's a positivity there, right? There's a unity, a shared vision. And the board, we had another board meeting last night, and I just left away from that board meeting just praising God for, wow, this is a group of growth mindset individuals that are just energized and we can do it attitude, dreaming big, not limiting God, and just fully on board and engaged. I am humbled by the connections that God is making for folks. I'm new to Austin. And so, a lot of times you come to a new city and there are the been here's and there are the come here's, right? And so I'm a come here to Austin, Texas, only relocated in July of 2022. And so in order to do something like this, to start a new school in a new city, it's beyond me. There's no way that I could do this of my own strength and my own abilities. And so I'm just humbled by how God is divinely connecting me and FOSA with other individuals that are rooted and connected and respected here in Austin. So I just want to celebrate that as probably the paramount victory to this point.
That's awesome. Shout out to that board. It's
Yes,
good
sir.
people on those that obviously have the vision that you have, that are all about furthering what you're doing. I would love to kind of dive in just a tiny bit on that, because actually I haven't really had a guest talk about the board side of things before. How did you go about finding the board that you have? And I guess, what did you decide on? Like, well, I need 5, I need 10, so I guess like, let's dive into that a tiny little bit. I love it because maybe there's a school listening going, oh, maybe I don't have a clear vision for my board. And I don't know. Let's dive into that a little bit.
Absolutely. So when I was struggling at my previous location with the board, I reached out to several of my mentors. And, when someone recommends something and one person says it, it's like, okay, that's really good. But then when a second person says like the same thing, it's like, okay, hold on. Or when a third person comes back and says the same thing, it's like, yes, Lord. Right? And so that's what happened in my experience. Mentors mentioned a book, and the book is called Inside the Nonprofit Boardroom. Now, I don't get any royalties from this, but I strongly recommend this book, Inside the Nonprofit Boardroom. It's a short, quick read. It's, I think, 82 pages. It's a quick read. But Mitchell, when I read through it, it just absolutely aligned with everything I'd learned about what a healthy board looks like and the relationship between the organizational's day-to-day operations leader and the board, and just resonated with me so much that as I read that book and now launching, I just went into prayer and I was like, Lord, I need you to show me who is in alignment with what I'm reading in this book. And from that, I just feel like through divine connections that the Lord has like led me or led people to me that have been in alignment with what I've read in that book. And so far, again, those who have signed on and now are board members, like right in step with what I'm reading in that book. As far as the number of board members, the book also mentions that, like a recommended range of board members. You can have a board that's way too small. Say 3 is way too small. I believe the book says 5 should be the minimum. I'm not sure that. I need to go back and read that portion again. But you do need enough of a number to where you can see the same situation from different perspectives. What you don't want is a small number of board members that kind of see everything the same, because then no changes can take place, right? Also, that book really did a great job of mentioning the importance of term limits. Sometimes on a board, when you have board members that have been there for a long time, they become entrenched in their thought and entrenched in their ways, and then nothing changes. And most effective leaders know that in an environment where there's no change, there's no growth, right? And so if you want growth, you need to bring about an atmosphere of continual change of it, change and improvement. And so I think there is validity to rotating your board members off after a certain number of years so you can stay fresh and stay relevant. So that book really resonated with me because it mentioned that in detail. Now, Mitchell, there's also a number of a board that to me becomes too big, too large, because when you have too many people's opinions, I think sometimes it becomes counterintuitive. So, the greatest book ever written, the Bible, brings about a great number, I feel. Jesus had 12 disciples. The number 12 represents governmental perfection. And so, as such, we in our bylaws have written that we don't want more than 12 board members at a given time.
Okay. And I would say I would agree with you. Anything more than 12, even when I think of it like a board, I'm like, man, even like 8 and 10, excuse me, that's a lot. I mean, even that's a lot, because there's a lot of, I think about a meeting and how long that's going to go on, because I was a part of a board for a homeless youth organization up in Alaska when I lived there. And I think on the total for board, I think we had I think it was 8. And then we had advisory board members, and they were also would come to the meetings, and it was like 4 extra. Man alive. Like it would just kind of go, it would just keep going on. And then people like, well, what do you guys think about this thing? And it's like, oh, here we go. And then it's just like everybody had to give their opinion, which of course that's their job, it's their point. So yeah, I would agree with you. No more than 12. And you're right. I know that Jesus changed the world with 12 people. So
Right.
I think we can change one school with 12 people pretty easily as well. Yeah. Obviously, I love this conversation. I always kind of want to lean towards wrapping it up, because I was in with the same question for everybody, which is, if you were to share a piece of wisdom or advice with any other school leaders that are listening, what would that piece of advice be?
Yeah, I was meditating on this morning about, what should I say that might be impactful for at least one. And Numbers chapter 9 talks about following the cloud of God, right? And the cloud calls protection, but also the cloud of God in Numbers 9 also led the Israelites through the wilderness, and that helped them navigate through different traps or different dangers. So I would say that we have a choice. We have free will to choose one or two courses. One is to follow God's cloud, or we can choose to labor in vain. And labor in vain, that comes from Psalm 127, I think verse 1. So we have a choice, either to follow the cloud or to labor in vain. Psalm 127 talks about, if the Lord's not in it, then all of our efforts is a waste. It's not going to work. It's going to be unsuccessful. It might stand for a season, but ultimately it's going to fall. So we have to have the Lord in it and with us as we step through the process. So going into a life of prayer and being led by the Lord is essential. His word says that he speaks and we recognize his voice. And so in prayer and through other people and through circumstances and through his word, he speaks to us. So I think we need to listen for his voice. The second thing I think that's important, deciding between either following the cloud or laboring in vain, is not only listen to his voice, but once we hear his voice, we need to obey. So whatever instruction he gives us, we need to be proactive about doing it. Don't wait. If we have a clear instruction, go ahead and follow through on it. And then I would say the third step to that is to make sure that we are observant of any changes. So we follow the cloud. When God opens and closes doors that only He can open and close, we need to be able to discern those changes and those seasons. When it's time for someone to leave our organization, we need to be in step with that and know when it's proper timing for that. When it's time to maybe change curriculum, when it's time to maybe talk about a second location, when it's time to change and a move, we need to let the cloud move first and then be in step and follow that cloud. So, leaders, we have the option, the choice to either follow the cloud or to labor in vain. As for me and my house, we're going to follow the cloud.
So good. So good. I love
Yes,
it.
sir.
Granville, thank you so much for taking time to be on the podcast. I can tell you're passionate about students. You're passionate about obviously the school you're starting. I can see it in your voice and your smile and all that. So I'm wishing you and for the Spirit Academy, FOSA, nothing but the best as you guys are doing all the steps needed to launch that in just a little over a year from when we're recording that. And I look forward to watching your growth through LinkedIn. I know you and I are connected on there, but just hearing from you and what you guys are doing. So again, wish you nothing but the best. And thank you again for taking time to be on the podcast today, man.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. I appreciate the offer and I'd love to come back some other time and give an update on how things are going in the future.
Definitely. Yeah,
Yes,
definitely
sir.
let me know. Well, another huge shout out and a thank you to Granville for being on the podcast today. I love what he's doing and I'm loving what he's building, and I'm wishing him and the Fruit of the Spirit Academy nothing but the best as they set to start and open in the fall of 2023. And I'm hoping those who are listening to today's episode were able to take at least one thing, even from a school that's not even started yet, and you're able to take something that you can take back to your school to make your school better than it is right now. And if you're a school that's struggling in some different areas of how to grow enrollment, how to connect better with families, with technology, and just be a better school in general so you're not the best kept secret anymore in the city, as I've heard from lots and lots of schools. We don't want that for you. We want you to be the best well-known school in your area. And if you need help with that, we can help you do that. You can check us out online, schoolsuccessmakers.com. That's schoolsuccessmakers.com. Or if you're more of a Facebook user, please join our private Facebook group just for school leaders called School Success Makers. That's School Success Makers on Facebook. I'm personally in there, and I'd love to see you in there as well. We'll be here next week with another amazing guest as usual on the School Success Podcast. We'll see you then.